Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another edition of What's Happening. I'm George Binns, and I'm here with my co-host, Elliot Margolis. And we're having as our guest, again, the Reverend Myozen Joan Amaral. Just out of curiosity, is Reverend and Myozen, is that redundant?
No, thank you. There's a lot of confusion around that. No, Reverend is a title, you know.
Yeah.
Myozen is my Dharma name.
Okay.
Your who name?
The who to what? My Dharma name.
Oh, okay.
So in the Zen tradition, it's a Japanese tradition, so Myozen is a Japanese word. It's actually two characters. And when we receive ordination, we receive what's called a Dharma name. And it's given to you by your teacher. But it's not arbitrary. It tends to be qualities that you're manifesting. So
what does yours mean?
Oh, thank you.
What does it translate as?
Myo means illumination or light or bright.
Okay. Yeah.
And Zen, you've heard of the word Zen, right? That means entire.
Okay.
Illumination entire. Okay. Look out.
Whatever. Yeah.
Well, yeah.
Yeah. Anyway,
But that's an important question because, and I appreciate the clarification because some people call me the Myozen, but that would be like calling you the George, the Elliot.
Yeah, I've been called other things too.
So you can call
explain
me.
to people, just don't call me Mr. George because some people think I'm a Greek hairdresser. But anyway.
That's a nice segue into immigrants.
Yeah.
Migrants.
And that's what we wanted to get into. The first time you were on the show, you mentioned that you deal with ECHO.
Yes.
And a few other organizations.
Yep.
What do you do with them?
Well, Zen Center partners with ECHO and with Beyond, the Boston Immigration Justice Accompaniment Network, so that, we join forces and we do things together. I think it's easier to be braver and to show up for things when you're doing things with other people. Because it's difficult work, and it's confusing work sometimes, and it can be very emotional. I've had kind of an emotional week. I feel a little tired, I noticed tonight. And talking about migrants and immigrants, I feel tired tonight talking about that. Many of us were in a hearing all day on Friday at the State House around a particular bill right now in the House. And so it's it's ongoing work. And I think we can say that it's immigrants, it's the issue of immigration and migrants, but it's more about humans, about human beings. How do we all kind of live together on this planet?
Well, I think when you start to think about migrants, you start to think about the great move west, or after World War. Well, it's, I guess, really the start of World War II, when agriculture got to be mechanized and a lot of people left the farms to work in the cities. And there was the great migration north into the Detroit area, Michigan area for the auto industry and whatever else they were making. So one of the interesting articles I picked up out of the Economist magazine was criticizing the concept of home ownership. And part of the argument against it is you get into the game of you buy a home and now you're trapped in it. And it's hard to move away from it because when the city goes down economically, your home isn't worth much. And I keep thinking back to the old story of the migrants that were moving west. They burned the house down to get the nails. And they take the nails with them to the new area and build a house with that.
Oh, interesting.
So that's, that guy, I think I don't think of that as much of a concern as much as the immigrants, or do you find anything different?
Well, George, I think that's a really wonderful way to open this up for all of us to relate with this. I appreciate that very much because I feel like one of the problems is that we see, when we talk about immigrants and migrants, we're talking about someone else. And so I'm going to share this story. It was told to me at our social justice group, and I think it really breaks down, for me, what we're really talking about when we're talking about pretty much anything because I'm Buddhist. And this is a story of interconnectedness. It's a story of how we all need each other and how we all impact each other. And we just had Dr. Martin Luther King's Day, last week. And his quote around this, it's a very famous thing that he said, was that we're all caught in a web of mutuality, that what affects one directly affects all of us indirectly. And so that's what this story is about. We might not always realize what a mouse and a pig have in common. So this is a story called The Mousetrap. It takes place in a barnyard. And so this mouse is looking through a crack in the wall and sees the farmer's wife come back with a paper bag. And the mouse thinks, oh, I wonder what delicious thing is in that paper bag. And to his horror, he sees that inside the bag is a mousetrap. And so the mouse runs into the yard, into the barnyard, and yells to all his friends, there's a mousetrap in the house, there's a mousetrap in the house. And the chickens, cluck, 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 say, oh, we're very sorry for you, Mr. Mouse, but what does this have to do with us? And he runs to the pig and says, there's a mousetrap in the house, a mousetrap in the house. And the pig says, I'm very sorry, Mr. Mouse, you'll be in my thoughts and prayers. And the mouse doesn't give up. He keeps running around and he sees the cow. He says to the cow, there's a mousetrap in the house. There's a mousetrap in the house. And the cow says, that's pretty rough. But what does that have to do with me? So the mouse goes back into the house to face the mousetrap alone. And in the middle of the night, there's this, and the farmer's wife comes running into the kitchen. And I think this might be an African story. Runs into the kitchen, it's dark in the kitchen, and she doesn't see that what's been trapped in the mousetrap is a poisonous snake whose tail got caught. And the farmer's wife gets bit. She gets bitten by the snake and is rushed to the hospital, but comes back with a fever, and you know what's fed a person with a fever? Chicken soup. And the woman keeps declining, and the sickness goes on, and so neighbors come to sit with her, and the farmer wants to take care of them, so he makes a nice pork meal.
And sandwiches for everyone. Yes.
Yes, and then the woman eventually dies, and so at the funeral, many, many people come, so the cow is required. So, and the mouse, looks sadly upon all of this through the crack in the wall. And anyway, this is a very moving story to me because it's so true that we don't always see. Like, even when I said that, I've told the story so many times. And it's like, what do a pig and a mouse have in common? It's not always so apparent that our destinies are so intertwined. And I feel like what I'm feeling so much these days is that I have a sense that we miss out so much on the beauty and the joy and actually the fun of life when we don't join forces, when we don't do things together, when we put ourselves in these little rooms called our houses, these little spaces, and we peer through the curtains every now and then we scuttle out to our car, the windows are rolled up, and we get to, and we live in these little tunnels. And I just wonder how much of us are missing out on a fuller expression of what it means to be alive.
I've heard that story a little different way, dealing with people like, the army came to get the Jews. Mm-hmm. But since I'm Catholic, doesn't matter.
Yep.
So, and then the army came to get the Protestants. But again, I'm Catholic, doesn't matter.
Yes.
Then the army came to get me, and there was nobody there to save me.
Yes.
So it's a similar type story.
Yes, it is.
It's one thing that has always bugged me is that you need to take people for who they are and not what they are. And I don't care whether you're male or female, black or white, or, it's what you contribute to everything. And it doesn't matter who packs your packages or who delivers the package or who answers the phone. What matters is the job gets done and everybody has something to contribute.
Yes. Yes.
So,
and for each one of us to feel that we have something to contribute.
right.
I want to tell another story about something I noticed at this hearing, because it's the Safe Communities Act, that this was the bill, and both Paul Tucker and Joan Lovely are supporting it. Yay! They sit on that committee, and so that was really wonderful to see that they're co-signers on that bill. But what I thought was really so important about that day was that there were many of us in support of this bill, and I like to think of that as being, you know, in the truth of interconnectedness, and that when one person's not safe, then no one's safe in a community.
Well,
and that,
what's the bills basically do?
well, yes, okay, thank you. So it's you know, one angle of it that I guess I would talk about because of my work with asylum seekers is really having more oversight of ICE, so that ICE is not able to act outside the law, that there are checks and balances, that ICE is operating within a democratic society. So this is specifically with regard to local police departments, local sheriffs, that they have some autonomy, and that if a person is pulled over because of a broken taillight or something, and they are an immigrant, that's not reported to ICE. So it keeps those separate, and I think that's really important. But there are people there as well who were not supporting the bill, and I think that's wonderful because it's debate. But one person, and I'm wondering if this person might watch this show, because I would really love to invite him to come to the Zen Center to speak at our social justice group. I was really intrigued by him. He had a T-shirt that said something like, "We don't owe illegals anything. We don't owe illegals anything." And as I say, this hearing went on all day. I left my house at 8 in the morning and I didn't get back until 7 p.m. And all our wonderful legislators, most of them stayed the entire day. They were all glazed over at the end.
Most of them are glazed over during the beginning, too.
Well, it's hard work. It's hard work, and it can be unrelenting. But so this one man, I noticed him right away early in the day, and then when he went up to give his testimony, it was late in the day, and he had heard many heart-wrenching testimonials from other people, including a whole group of women who had been raped. They're survivors of some kind of either domestic violence or some kind of sexual assault, and they were afraid to report that to the police because they were afraid that then that would get reported to immigration officials. So that's a really clear example of if there's a rapist in the community who's not being apprehended, other people are going to be at risk.
Well, I think the second part of that story gets to be the rapist is probably also illegal too, in the concern that...
Why would you say that?
That's why it gets reported. If it's the same community, they're probably all illegals.
Well,
or a big percent of them are illegals.
Actually, I would say if it's a workplace sexual assault, it's very likely that the perpetrator is not a person who's undocumented.
We could have a long discussion on this one. But anyway, I think part of the concern that is being voiced about ICE is too many of these illegals have a nasty habit, whether it's drugs, gangs, whatever, and they get turned loose and continue their nastiness. So there's a balance that they're trying to achieve between get the bad guys and girls off the street and out of the country and keep them out.
I think the problem is that for us to really be very careful about not equating, you know, I don't use the word illegal, I use the word undocumented. But undocumented, illegal, whatever, with criminal. That is very important to keep those two separate. And so what I wanted to say, just to complete the thought that I was trying to share, was after witnessing, hearing the testimonials of so much suffering, this one particular man with that very aggressive message on his T-shirt, when he gave his testimonial late in the day, his whole face had changed. He looked like he'd been through hell. I mean, we had been through hell. And he got up there, and what he said was that he had been born in Germany. He was maybe about your age. Born in Germany during the, well, I don't know. He was born during the war, during World War II.
Okay, so he's older than me.
Okay, a little bit, like maybe between your age.
So as I am.
Mid-40s, mid-1940s anyway. I think he said 1945.
I was born in 37, yeah.
Yep, okay. And so he, and then he was put up for adoption. And he himself had been a victim of violence. I believe he said sexual violence. Yeah. And so he was understanding, he was relating, but what I saw as a priest and as a meditation teacher, what I saw in his face and what I heard in his words was he was beginning to get into his own pain. And so, because one thing that I keep hearing people say is, my ancestors came through legally, Yeah. We're all sort of immigrants here, but my ancestors came through illegally, so why aren't these people coming through? My ancestors came through legally, why aren't these people coming through legally? And what I hear in that is resentment and bitterness, And so what would be helpful, I think, is to get into my own personal pain. Because there's an example I want to give you, another example of lately in the, politicians are talking about universal free access to free university, free college.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And some people, we were talking about this last night at the Zen Center, and someone said, yeah, my whole family is very upset about this because my parents put all four of us through college. They paid for it. So why should people these days have free college tuition? And they're like, oh, and that's just so, it's so unenlightened or whatever. Why can't we take care of each other? And I said, well, wait a minute. Let me just share that I am the first person in my family to graduate from college. And I put myself through college, and it took me 10 years to pay off my college loans. So there's a little part of me that goes, yeah, I know what you mean, if you're kind of resentful of that. But guess what, George? What I want to share is that I could fall into bitterness and resentment. Like, hey, I had it rough. Why can't these people have it rough too? But what I'd rather...
That's not what they're saying.
What I'd rather do is connect and be in solidarity, because it was difficult to pay off all those student loans, and to make it easier. So in other words, to treat people now the way I would have wanted to have been treated, as opposed to the way I was treated.
Okay, couple of things.
Yes.
Number one, we're a nation of laws. So what gives anybody the right to decide which laws to obey and which not to obey? If you're coming here, this is a country of immigrants, and we welcome immigrants, but we have to be able to know who's coming, and we have to see who they are. And if we don't, it creates the problems that George was talking about. Yeah. Now, if you give people something for free all the time, first of all, nothing's free. When Amazon says free freight, it's not free. Somebody's paying for it. UPS does not work for free. Somebody is paying for it. Now, is
it's
that
coming
somebody?
Out of the workers' wages, probably.
Okay, or it's coming out of my taxes.
It's
why
coming
should
out of the price you paid for it.
Yeah. Why should I work as hard as I work and not be able to benefit from the money that I earn? Mm-hmm. Right now, the average American person pays more than 50% of their income in taxes and fees. Okay?
Yep.
So I guess the question would be, what percentage of my income is fair for me to keep? Because right now I'm keeping probably 45% of it.
Yeah, and it's too little.
And so when I said, the people in Boston were glazed over in the morning, the people in Washington haven't done their job. You talk about being glazed over. My grandfather was an immigrant. My wife's grandfather was an immigrant. We welcome immigration, but we have to have control or you're not a nation.
Yes, I understand completely. And one thing I want to say is this, I see up there, it's called Migrants and Immigrants, but we don't have up there, and this is very important, asylum seekers. My grandfather, when he came, he was not an asylum seeker. He was not fleeing. He was fleeing from a difficult relationship with his father, but that's a different story.
Yeah.
He wasn't in danger. It's not that asylum seekers are coming necessarily for a better life. They're coming because they're trying to survive very difficult situations. So, what I really want to do and what we're doing is to have a conversation about this, to get more into the subtler realms, because I hear exactly what you're saying. And I think it doesn't have to be the polarity of if asylum seekers get more, then the white working class or whoever, people in this country, people who are already here, get less. It doesn't have to be that way.
Well,
one of the things that we do at the
That is an important point.
Yes.
How do you all of a sudden provide services to a large group of people without impacting the people that have to pay the taxes?
Yeah. Well, one thing, George, remember, so I think I mentioned a couple times ago at the Zen Center, we're doing, as one Dharma, Zazen meditation, which I kind of want to do right now. Zazen. But we could just take a breath, a cleansing breath. Yeah. Right? We're alive and we're here and we're in good company and we're getting in there. We're not being coy about this. We're really getting in there, and I appreciate that because we're human beings who want to do good. All three of us.
There are real positions that need to be discussed, and you can't gloss them over. And I think that's one of the problems that, it just goes over here. Don't worry about it.
So, George, I think we need fearless leadership that's also imaginative. I started to say Zazen, meditation, social justice, or justice for everybody.
Right.
Justice for everybody. Self-care, nourishment, and creativity. That's the most important one. I feel like we need to open up our consciousness, our imagination, to imagine other ways of dealing with these seemingly intractable problems. So one thing I want to say in response to the rule of law, extremely important. I work with so many lawyers these days, and one of the gross errors that's being committed over and over again is a lack of due process. As soon as we don't have due process for every single individual, all of us are at risk. That's a constitutional right, and that's what I'm most concerned about. So that's where the oversight comes in. So I think, as someone said recently, if we can all just take a step back and breathe, and then gather teams of good-hearted, smart people from different sectors to get together and talk about this, because I'm not talking about open borders. I know there needs to be process, but it's a mosh pit right now. It's a stampede because there are crises, these dual crises that are like colliding right now, the migrant crisis and the climate crisis. So much of what migrants are fleeing has to do with rapidly changing conditions in their hometown, their villages, their communities, where there's no drinking water, like the soil, there's no food, that everything's changing so rapidly that people are getting afraid. And then you have like the bad guys who are taking advantage of that. So you have families who are caught between two really difficult situations.
Wouldn't it make more sense for our country, instead of taking these people in to, let's just take one example, say El Salvador, send people there to help them clean the water, show them how to do medical situations that are needed, and kind of teach them to take care of their own people? Wouldn't that make more sense?
Well, I think what would be really wonderful to do, since the United States foreign policy back in the 80s created a lot of these problems, it would be great for us to send groups down there to work with the locals and fortify efforts that are already in place to clean up the water, to clean up, government corruption, things like that. But I think that it's really important that we acknowledge, just like, again, back to this interdependence, here we are 20, 30, 40 years later, and it's a backlash of U.S. foreign policy in Central America, and El Salvador is a really good example of that.
Well, you get into that situation, and it's what caused this, and then what caused that.
Yep.
And part of the reason for the American intervention in South America and Central America in the 70s and 80s was the Russians and the communists were taking over local governments. And we felt that, we got to save the world for democracy or to keep the communists out of it. And it was a reaction on our side to what the communists and Cuba in particular were doing. And so now that there's a mess there, and do we really want to go back in and sort that out again? I mean, we've got a problem that we're all over the place militarily and economically. And in most cases, we're criticized for it. We, the Americans, are criticized for it. And we're not being very effective. The Arab Spring is a good example.
But that's the key. We're not being effective in spending our money the right way. I think we've got the right intentions, but I don't know if you've ever heard the expression, good intentions lead the road to hell. It's not the good intentions that are important, it's what you do with them. And we're not doing a good job. But the idea is the right idea. Help people help themselves.
Well, let's take Mexico for an example. That's
Okay,
our
but you
neighbors.
only have 30 seconds to do that.
No, we got a little bit more than that.
How much time do we have?
Not according to...
Okay.
Let's work with what we've got.
Okay.
So, but
We'll start with Mexico next time.
I don't know about this good intentions, about what you just said. I mean, I am concerned about any kind of, helping. I am much more interested in solidarity, and it's back to that mind, because I'm a Buddhist here, I mean, and I'm a priest, and I'm a meditator, and so I'm just wondering, back to the beginning, about if we have this mind of interconnectedness, how we're all capable of good and we're all capable of evil. We're all capable of helping, and we all need help. So there's a mutuality to all of this that I don't know. I mean, but what I would like to ask is if in the last 20 seconds, we could just sit together and breathe with the cameras rolling. It's not over yet. Can we just sit together?
Okay.
Like thank you. Just return to our bodies, because this was hot and heavy, and just our long spines.
Long spine, yep.
Yep. Our chest open, our shoulders dropped, eyes open or closed, but just reconnecting with our natural goodness and what we would say in Buddhism are not knowing mind. Not knowing is most intimate. Not knowing, but here, showing up and opening up and feeling whatever it is that we're feeling. Just a couple deep breaths. On the inhale, expanding through the chest, opening the heart, and on the exhale, letting go completely, trusting, grounding.
Okay, but now I have to interrupt because we really only have a few seconds to go.
We lasted, what, 10 seconds?
This was
We got the thumbs up over there.
This was really fascinating, and we need you here again to continue this. This is not a 30-minute show. This is more than that.
Yeah.
Next week's show is going to be sort of like this in a way, because we're having as a guest Rabbi Schusterman from Peabody
Great.
to talk about anti-Semitism throughout the world.
Okay.
Why are people anti-Semitic? So that relates to this.
Yes, it does.
How
do we work with our fear?
Yeah. Hopefully you enjoyed this show. You're going to see more like this, because it's a fascinating issue,
and
it's timely, and we're having fun. So thanks for watching, and see you next time.